CNBC TV18 GLS Studios. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Global Leadership Summit where we are celebrating 25 years of CNBC TV18. It's been an exhilarating journey, and today at this very special summit we've had lots of thought leadership, lots of new ideas about what perhaps the next 25 years have in store for the Indian economy, for the Indian markets, and for the entire ecosystem. I'm Surabhi Upadhyay, and right now I have with me a very special guest. We have Mr. Ajay Sharma, who is the Managing Director and Head Commercial Bank India at HSBC Commercial Banking. Ajay, it's great to have you for this conversation. Thank you for taking out the time. First of all, have you had fun at the Global Leadership Summit so far?
No, it's been amazing. I think the quality of speakers and the content, I mean, you can never get this over 2-3 months, and this is like one very compact capsule of unbelievably high quality information. So it's been really good fun to be here.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to sort of pull you out and get a little bit of perspective on something that you look at so closely, the MSME segment, commercial banking, and really what the trends are like here in India and how they compare with the rest of the region, the rest of the world as well. So, having seen this business for the past so many years, how would you describe the segment, the MSME segment here in India, the growth, the aspirations, the opportunities, and maybe even some of the challenges?
So, first of all, thank you for asking the question. Commercial banking for us, really, the heart of that sits in the MSME business for HSBC. Given the history that the bank has, that's where we started. We have customers that start with us. Some of our oldest relationships are 70, 80 years old.
Wow.
And they all started off probably in the MSME space, and they've grown to become super large corporates. So we are very proud of our history and what we do with this sector. And if you look at this sector, I mean, look at India, the MSME, there are 63 million companies, and all of them have the same issues, which is how do you get access to credit? But they're so important. They employ 30% of all the people. They're 30 to 40% not, and I think in India it's 40% of all the exports. They're 30% of our GDP. They sit squarely in terms of government focus. If we have to get to 2 trillion as an exporting economy by 2030, which is the government's, Piyush Goyal talked about it. This morning, Uday Kotak talked about the fact that our current account surplus has to be there for us to be a strong economy. It has to be there for export-led. But the challenges in India are the same as what we see in the region. And COVID was quite difficult for this segment because pre-COVID, ADB estimated there's a funding gap of maybe $1.5 trillion, and now it's gone up to $2.5 trillion, same study. So the biggest challenge MSMEs have is how do you get access to funding?
And it's interesting you say that because one would have imagined that the post-COVID impact, perhaps sort of now those wounds would have sort of healed to a large extent. Have they not? And where are we in terms of this whole access to funding and the recovery after COVID?
So I think the bounce back was quick, and now we are in a very stable place for the MSMEs. I think what's going to happen and what's really happened in the country is you look at the digital infrastructure that's been created, and when I talk about the digital infrastructure, it's cost of data, it is free transfers, and India being such a digital economy now than ever before, and for me that is the big hope going forward, where how do you use data to reach a credit decision? Because I know if you're delayed, I know what taxes you have paid, when did you pay them, how much did you pay them, how many people do you employ. I can access your financials independently of you. I mean, the India stack is just unbelievable. And it's exciting for banks like us because for us to scale up with the network that we have, and we obviously want a larger network over time, our ability to assess credit using pure data is something that we are super focused on. And I think other banks are too. And then how do you monitor names? How do you figure out what the wallet is? It actually allows you to be very sharp. And for us, that is eventually going to be the way business has to be done. Because when you're doing small ticket lending into what is essentially the growing corporate sector, this is the only way to get to scale.
So it's digital that will become an enabler for faster growth of the segment of this business and more access to finance as well for MSMEs?
It almost has to be digital first in my view, because digital first also allows these companies to get controls. You want a payment infrastructure to be built up. Banks like us and others can get into the ERP and get the payments in a safe manner. You don't need to hire 4 people to manage your payments on a daily basis. There are no checks anymore. So there are huge benefits that digitization will bring to the MSME and make them more competitive. So we just look at this as a really critical sector for the growth of the Indian economy, and therefore along with that, banks like us.
Okay. Well, just in the near term, so what you described is obviously the long-term opportunity, but just in the near term, in the last couple of months, there's been some chatter, some murmurs about a slowdown in some segments, in say consumer, maybe some hiccups around the microfinance segment. Right now, as you see things ahead, do you see it becoming at all an issue in terms of credit growth or asset quality or any kind of credit challenges for the commercial segment at all? Is there any reason to be concerned?
Not that we see.
Okay, lovely. So that's good to hear. That's reassuring. Yeah,
we are in a good place, I think. So, but yes, and we do have to all, as I tell people, hold our nerve and look through the cycle, because if India is on a secular growth trend, there will be hiccups.
Yeah.
We have to be ready for them, but not panic.
Sure, sure. So I want to talk about, a couple of other very interesting aspects and areas. One is the whole green transition, the targets, whether it's sort of moving to net zero or looking at the whole energy transition story as well, right? And reducing emissions and all of that. So how are you looking at green financing and taking that to the commercial banking space, the MSME space? What's happening here?
So this is going to become super important, right? If you want to export, especially to Europe, you just need to follow their standards. And they have just probably the most advanced standards, and they're far ahead of anybody else. So I think that's a challenge. Now, how do small companies get access? And I think that's where the banking system has to play a role. The regulator has to play a role, nudging everyone to embrace best practices. And what we have done is we've done a tie-up with a global player, which we bring to our customers and say, okay, this is where you are today. This is where you need to get to. Let's work through a plan. And then for us as a bank, it is, okay, can I help you or incentivize you? And the incentive is actually quite small, but it's important to directionally nudge people to get the best practices. And whether it's trying to get solar power to run your operations or, just changing the old boiler with a new one and best social practices, etc., etc. And I think that's what the role of the banks is going to be in the green transition.
Okay.
I think the bigger transition obviously is around the renewable space and the solar, wind, and the government policies there are very clear.
Yeah.
So there we see a huge amount of focus and attention. And that's at the other end where there's project financing and how do you really get capital into the country.
Sure. So to take up sort of both of these pieces separately, like you're saying, one could be the role of a gentle nudge or a mentor or a guide into making, getting that company to make the switch, that small sort of transition to something which would be, greener or healthier, so to speak. And there, what do you see on ground? And, do you find a lot of these corporates receptive? Do you see change already happening?
So at the MSME end, they're quite receptive because I think they see this as almost probably existential, right? If you can't export to Europe, then so we better embrace these practices. And we've, as I said, we've tied up and we bring that capability in partnership with somebody who's independent of us. And it's really important that other banks and the industry really focuses on trying to do this. And we will do with the industry bodies and work with them on this space. So that's going to be very important for the MSME space.
And the other part, which is actual lending to companies that are part of the whole green ecosystem. I mean, they could be sort of bigger companies in boilers and turbines or something else, or solar panels or smaller parts of the chain. I mean, is HSBC doing a lot more in this arena? What do you see in the next, say, 5 years ahead?
So we do. And, at the top level, I mean, you have the renewable companies which do solar, wind, hydro, pumped hydro, etc. And I think those are longer term, 15, 20-year financings, and obviously we'll play our role. part of our role is to actually, and there's a huge amount of capacity available where the multilaterals or even funds outside are going to say, you know what, we will mitigate your risk. We will help you extend that 22-year tenor that your customers want, et cetera, et cetera. So it then becomes a capital allocation game, and then how do you find more capacity? And I think there's just a huge demand for India renewable paper for project financing. And we are stepping up and trying to lead that space amongst the international banks.
Okay, how?
I think at the next level there's modules and cells, and that's, you know, there's government policy supporting that.
PLI schemes,
and then people are exporting to markets like the US. And that's, again, the amount of capital that needs to go in there is huge, and then you have the next level, which is EVs and batteries. And so I think this whole ecosystem for us is probably one of the most exciting places for us to be in. Because that's the size and scale of the ambition that the government has set out of 50 gigawatts a year. And then the downstream impact is just amazing. So it's a really exciting space for us.
So this is sounding good, because it's good for the planet and good for the business from what you say.
And it's low cost. It's cheaper than any other source of power today. So, and battery prices will come down, I think, over time.
Okay, fantastic. So one more aspect, and that is the whole startup ecosystem, which has really been booming in India. And now we've reached a stage where a lot of the earlier startups are actually, you know, maturing and coming to the public markets, right? So it's really coming a full circle in that sense. What role do you see that, you know, HSBC will continue to play in this part of the market going forward?
So we started 5-6 years ago, and you know, I think there have been a few triggers, and I talked about how low the data cost is in India, how payments are free, digital ID, the whole India stack. And I think, first of all, there's a huge development of internet related fintech companies, et cetera, whether it's quick commerce, e-commerce, and that's been huge. And then there's a whole other startup ecosystem, whether it is, you know, looking at foods in a different manner. Or so what we started doing is we set up a very initial program 4-5 years ago, which looked at two aspects. One was all the funds. So you have a lot of Indian PE companies and many, many more venture capital companies. And we went to them and said, okay, we'll work with you if you want international account opening and your funds are coming from overseas, we'll help you with that. So that was one ecosystem that we tapped in. But then we said, listen, we want to deal with any company that you invest in. And we'll offer them basic services like accounts and payments and collections, et cetera, and over time maybe give a corporate credit card. So we start introducing you to credit, even though most companies didn't require it. As they started getting into product market fit, then I can give you financing against your sales. And we used up the $100 million very quickly. So we then went to 250, and then we used that up. So we are now at 300 usage with a program of $600 million. What's that helped us do is, one, we have credibility with the funds that we do genuinely lend money to startups and, you know, take the risk. Equally, we now deal as a result of that with half the unicorns in India. So out of the 108 at last count, we had more than 55. So, and then as they go into capital markets or fundraisings, again, it's very natural for many of them to deal with us. So we are very proud in terms of what we have done. And then institutionally, last year, when the Silicon Valley Bank had problems, we went and bought up the UK operations as a bank. And as a result of that, I think the focus actually is doubled into this space, because we just think that's an ecosystem in many parts of the world, whether it's the US, UK, India, Southeast Asia, is really, really big. And therefore, how do we help that aspect of the economy growing? And sometimes, I mean, you meet the most amazing entrepreneurs with the best ideas, and, you know, it's great to be able to support some of these companies.
Okay, well, sounds inspiring, sounds very, very promising, and thank you for sharing these insights with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Right.